When I last looked at Hell Let Loose, there was one game that was repeatedly mentioned in the comments as being in a similar style. A title that I hadn't looked at before, but I'm happy to rectify that now, as we ask, Squad, is it worth playing? And having spent some time in Squad now, I can see why those comparisons to Hell Let Loose were so prevalent. Almost all of the qualities that make that World War II title so appealing are also present in this game, set in more modern times. It's the hardest of the hardcore for FPS games, closer to something like a military shooter. It isn't a title looking to hold your hand or pander to your kill streaks. This is about realistic combat and performing as a coordinated group in stressful situations. There's really good attention to detail here in Squad. Things like weapons and vehicles are recreated with accuracy, but never descend into the fetishization that we've seen from other FPS titles. A bit like everything else in Squad, these are tools to do a certain job, achieve a set objective, and don't get bogged down in the minutiae. But that ethos also extends to other areas of the game too. Maps are logically and functionally set out, but don't attempt to scale the cinematic heights of something that you might experience in like a Battlefield game. In short, this isn't a game looking to spend its time on eye candy for eye candy's sake. That might betray the obviously smaller development team when compared to something like a AAA team, and just look at something like the set dressing in a recent big-name FPS game to see quite how much attention to detail is required in just a single room these days, but also that the Squad devs clearly have their priorities for the finite amount of resources at their disposal. This isn't a game that feels the need to trade on how the screenshots look. One area they have focused on, though, is sound. The visuals might not be vying for complete realism, but the sound design wants to put you absolutely into the heart of the action. Like Hell Let Loose, Squad has some superb dynamic range in the sounds within the game. That difference between the quietest noise, like maybe wind or footsteps, to something loud like a vehicle, gunfire or an explosion, feels really wide in comparison to more mainstream titles. If your squad mate fires with you nearby, it lessens your ability to hear other sounds, and that's exactly how it should work. It also means that while you're actually firing, it's difficult to stay aware of other things happening around you, maybe even to hear people talking on the radio. It may seem like a gimmick, perhaps even an annoyance to someone used to more mainstream AAA titles, but when you have games where voice callouts are effectively as loud as something like gunfire, it lessens the impact that event should have. It robs the gameplay of the weight and the presence that it should have, and the overall experience suffers as a result. In short, it's well done. Things sound as expected and in keeping with something like a military simulator. I'm sure there will be more improvements to specific items, but the overall ethos for the design is a real high point for Squad. And just a quick comment to say, if you do like this video, please do tap the thumb up button, as it really helps me out with YouTube and growing the channel and making videos in the future that I hope you'll like too. So if you choose to do that, then a big thanks to you. It really is appreciated. Having said all that though, initially I didn't gel with Squad quite like I did with Hell Let Loose. I found myself more at sea and not quite knowing what I should be doing or even what direction I should be pointing in. Some of this is clearly about lack of communication or game experience, but all the same I found myself confused, probably a bit stressed and quite often rather dead. I found the game less cinematic in style to Hell Let Loose and more abrasive with a realistic tone. I think that that's sort of in part with how we look at World War II through sort of sepia-filtered lenses of old news footage and films made about that period, whereas modern-day Battlefield that Squad portrays is much more about the helmet cam world of nightly news and documentaries. But with that change in tone, it also reflects a change in patterns and the makeup of combat. World War II being a much more structured and linear. You're over here and the enemy is over there behind that line. It's quite easy to grasp, and the games reflect that too. Squad's rendering of more modern warfare features many of the changes that have occurred. There's so much more mobility available. Helicopters, reliance on vehicles over trench warfare, and so on. The increased number of those vehicles seem to create more instances of feeling defenseless towards them too. It leads to a less immediately easily understandable environment for a new player, or at least that's how I found it. Still, it did feel like an authentic portrayal of the things that you kind of see happen in the news. Troops in building complexes peering over high walls, incoming fire, keeping people's heads down and robbing them of information about what is actually happening outside. It's just not one that someone enthused with the idea of the game could really start to process and engage with meaningfully at the start. This feeling is really reduced though when teamed up with a good squad leader. It's again impressive how rewarding doing things as a unit can feel. In other games you might look at the scoreboard and consider how many kills you managed to get in that match, but for Squad, at least for a new player, it can almost feel inconsequential. Of much more importance is whether people followed orders, whether they helped construct buildings, whether when they were in contact with the enemy that people engaged them as ordered, and so on. And with that requirement of good teammates, I found myself revisiting the same servers over and over. If I know a particular clan owns those servers and participate in the squad leading and with the latest patch, commander roles, then you know you're more likely to have a positive, enjoyable experience playing the game. It can mean that overall there's quite a learning curve, but that the game obviously attracts a certain kind of player. People looking for this experience also want teammates who want the same thing. It can mean people take things, if not quite seriously, perhaps it's kinder to say that they want back what they put in. An example of this would be that some leads simply only allow people with mics in their squad. You need to be an active participant, relaying information and following orders. There is zero slack given to people looking to lone wolf with a scope on a rock somewhere. It may sound a bit harsh, but this game needs communication and coordination as a baseline. If this doesn't sound like your idea of fun, then there are obviously a multitude of other titles to play, because squads might not be really for you. For those who do enjoy that kind of gameplay, it offers real enjoyment and a feeling of camaraderie with people that you've perhaps only known for a matter of minutes like almost no other. It's again where a good squad lead can make all the difference. It might not be the best choice in the world, but being decisive when in command is almost half the battle. Tell people what to do, what you expect from them, and congratulate them when things go well, or perhaps commiserate when things don't go quite to plan. The scrapes you get into, the skirmishes you win or lose, draw you closer together. This becomes the game. This becomes what squad is to play. It's worth drawing some attention to the suppression system in Squad 2. It feels like perhaps a more realistic mechanic, and one that actually has gameplay implications. If you're used to playing, say, COD or Battlefield, and if you have contact with the enemy, you tend to want to respond in a fairly sort of clinical way. Strafe, maybe prone, identify where the other player is, and once acquired, shoot back with reasonable accuracy. You want to, in an instant, outmaneuver and out-aim the enemy. The suppression system in Squad takes a more realistic route. If people are shooting at you, it is off-putting and concerning, to say the least. There is visual impairment, the cracks of bullets flying nearby, the zips of rounds passing very close to you. This all mounts pressure on players. A stray round can of course kill you instantly in this game. So unlike a normal FPS game, this military sim rewards teams who respond well in these high-pressured situations. Returning fire, even without knowing exact locations of enemy players, becomes very important. Even rough, that tree line or left of those rocks sort of callouts allow friendlies to apply pressure back on those who have engaged you. Reacting effectively, not freezing up, those more realistic skills are rewarded here in Squad 2. Performance is mixed, though the devs seem to realise that, and I have seen some map refreshes focus on performance. As it is, on some maps, I can have 60 plus FPS 1 second, then run over a ridge to see it dip into the 20s at a time. Yet on the recently refreshed maps, I'm seeing 60 FPS held pretty well on my 970 GPU. And speaking of updates, there seems to be a decent cadence of new content and refinement of existing stuff going on. The recent Beta 17 update adds a whole new commander role to each side, allowing an in-game player to have top-level authority over that team's forces. The previous update was Beta 16, unsurprisingly, and that was released just about a month previous to 17, so there's certainly active development happening here. We should probably talk about what beta means here too. Squad has an original Steam release date of the 15th of December 2015, so it's coming up on almost 4 years in early access. It's clear that developers are still very much engaged with the project, with updates, and that the player base is looking pretty healthy too, especially for a more niche title such as this one. Looking at the concurrent users since that 2015 launch, we see a fairly steady upwards trend, with current player numbers peaking at 5,000 to 6,000 CCUs on weekdays and weekends. I never had a problem finding a match, or indeed discovering that my favourite servers were all empty. Yet this beta tag does mean that there are some rough edges to the game, things that might be rounded over on a title closer to a full release. Part of that, I guess, is the size of the development team, but I'd also guess that more of the focus is on moving forward with the project over stopping to polish everything. To that end, even though it says beta, and there is more and more being added, I consider Squad to be effectively, or maybe even functionally released. It's enough of a game to play every day. The bugs don't tend to be game-breaking in my experience. Early access does seem to be made for a title such as this one, It's hard to imagine another small studio working in private, and with all the funding that would require, and creating a title like Squad that is so focused on such a niche experience. Surely at some point a publisher would want to broaden its perceived player base by diluting the various things that make these titles so special and revered. Squad has been in many Steam sales and even part of a humble bundle. For me, the game feels, as I say, sort of effectively released. So, is it worth playing? If this sort of experience piques your interest, if you think you're the kind of person who might enjoy taking on a challenge with other like-minded FPS fans, perhaps with a slightly more serious edge, then I'd certainly recommend you trying out Squad. It's not the cheapest of titles, $39.99 in the US and £32.50 in the UK, though I would repeat that I've seen the game in Steam sales and elsewhere too. It's a game that provides a very specific experience, and I admit it's sometimes not what I want in my evenings playing a game, but when I do want that kind of experience, there's nothing quite like this title and the community that is built up around it for providing the sort of challenge and camaraderie that you seldom find elsewhere in gaming. As so many of you mentioned Squad in my Hell Let Loose video comments, I'm interested to know what you think of Squad and of this video, and maybe even if there are other titles you'd like to see me look at in the future. Please scroll down and leave a comment below right now. I'll of course be reading every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I want to apologise with how long the gap has been since the last one till this one. Been a bit under the weather recently, but I'm back at it now. So thanks to your continued support, it really does mean a lot to me. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Take care.